Chapter 9: Increasing Sales Productivity. Productivity improvement is not the panacea. Although productivity is commonly noted by management and sales reps as an initial area they want to improve, I'm not as enthusiastic about focusing on this area. Firstly, there is only so far that the needle can be moved with regard to productivity. Although we can facilitate improvements in this area, it usually is not the root of a turnaround issue, nor is it the lowest hanging fruit for improving profitability and growth. Secondly, and more importantly, the return on increased productivity is usually not as great as the return on increased focus on higher priority business or optimization of positioning or pricing or value in other areas, which will more likely and more easily garner much higher returns in profit and growth. Nevertheless, there are a few strategies that can quickly bring about increases in productivity as well as accelerate the rate of innovation that will also help to increase productivity and effectiveness. Ultimately, these efforts do have some impact on the bottom line, so they are worth some attention. Wielding your strategic abandonment sword. For all that has been written about time management, the fact is that you really can't manage time. You can manage priorities, and that's it. This is why having a foundational strategy, clarifying key objectives, identifying critical success factor activities, and implementing continuous improvement through an innovation process will have the most impact on effectiveness. It is worth reviewing this fact about the misnomer of time management with your team. As you discuss productivity and direction with your team, you'll want to ask the two most important priority management questions that help you align your team's direction and enable them to fall into echelon as a team. One of those questions is, what is the most important thing for me, you, us to be working on right now? The more important but less frequently asked question is, what do I, you, we need to stop doing? It is only through regularly asking this question of yourself and your team that you will begin to optimize focus and productivity. In the turnaround, it is critical that you thoroughly look at these strategic abandonment opportunities on a macro and micro basis. With all of the innovations, changes, and new initiatives that you will be required to undertake, you must also be abandoning practices that allow for the time to focus on these higher priorities. Echeloned quiet hours. The quiet hour is a powerful productivity improvement practice that some companies have made part of their culture. It can greatly improve your team's ability to focus more time on the turnaround and growth strategy. One of the greatest challenges for any knowledge worker, let alone sales, is the ability to spend enough time on non-urgent but highly important work. How often are your employees working under the tyranny of the urgent, jumping from one small urgent but unimportant fire to the next, reassuring themselves that they are doing important work because at least the forest isn't ablaze? The problem is that their important but not urgent work is to cut wood. Many of the critical success factor activities you will identify under each of your objectives will fall under this category of non-urgent but important. The steps to implement the quiet hour are simple. You block off time on your calendar as if it is an appointment with yourself. You close the door, literally or figuratively. You have phones forwarded to voicemail with a message that gives the caller a way to get through if it is urgent and says at what time you'll be available. This enables others to call you back rather than leaving another message. Lastly, you turn off the email alarm that rings with every spam that hits your mailbox, and now you're ready to work uninterrupted for 60 minutes or whatever amount of time you choose. For management, the quiet hours are the ideal time to focus on the critical success factor activities that are tied to your strategic growth objectives. You should aim to have a minimum number of quiet hours per week for such work. Quiet hours work because we benefit from uninterrupted focus. You will notice that you will pick up an increased momentum. The practice almost seems illogical during a turnaround mode, but the fact is, in such a time of stress, you and your team need to slow down to speed up. You need the quiet and solidity of an hour to knock out important work. Sales reps often have a terrible challenge in getting enough time to set appointments. My recommendation to sales managers is to encourage or require the team to habitually have a minimum number of hours blocked off every week for such work. An approach that works for some teams is to have predetermined hours around which the entire sales team goes into quiet hour for the purpose of appointment setting, for example. This is an activity that is often put off. So any little tool to help maintain a habit of more calls can help. If you aren't satisfied with the amount of time dedicated to your non-urgent but highly important work on your calendar and your team's calendar, and if you want to ensure that more focus is given to the critical success factor activities associated with your growth or turnaround objectives, consider instituting this as a company-wide practice so it becomes an echeloned quiet hour. Using priority management to accomplish the turnaround strategy. Your turnaround strategy will beget thousands of necessary actions that need to be taken. It is paramount that these actions happen as soon as possible and in the right order. Thus, it is not overkill to ensure that your team is prioritizing activities with expeditiousness and aplomb. When the following practice becomes part of the company's culture and vernacular, it also becomes part of the foundation for a highly intensified focus and productivity. Knowing your A's and B's and 1, 2, 3s. These 3 steps have 3 key benefits. First, you'll get more done. Some say this approach will save more than an hour a day, but in reality, it just means you have accomplished 1 more hour of work from your to-do lists than you otherwise would have. Secondly, you'll be less stressed. Knowing your plan, knowing that things aren't falling through the cracks, gives you a greater sense of control and ease, and you'll wake up to a purpose, not an alarm clock. Thirdly, you'll save money. There will be less overnight mail, last-minute rushes that cost you time and money, and finally, most importantly, you'll get more of the most important work done first. That is a heck of a list of benefits for what can take as little as 5 minutes a day. Have you ever noticed the way every time management guru seems to push his or her own custom labels for to-do lists? At first, it was the A, B, C's, and D's, and you had to know what each letter meant, but nobody remembered. So they would print it on their custom day planning sheets, and then you would forget to use them and just create a list of to-dos on your overpriced calendar. In reality, there are only 2 types of priorities that you need to be aware of in daily planning: urgent and non-urgent. Anything that is due today is an urgent matter and thus an A priority. If you would be forced to work late, if a certain task wasn't accomplished by quitting time, then it is an A. If you have a lot of A's rolling over to another day, you aren't being honest about your priorities. So if anything could roll over to tomorrow's list, no matter how important, it is still just a B. Every day is full of interruptions that will change your originally planned course, and there will be times when you must decide if you can stop everything to answer someone else's urgent request. For example, if it's 2 p.m. and someone comes in with an urgent need that will tie up your time for the rest of the day, yet you still have a couple of A's on your list, you must make the decision that you will either be working late or will need to make a few phone calls to see if those A's can wait. Having the must-be-done todays clearly marked gives you the ability to decide upon changes with greater alacrity. It also gives you an out when people attempt to tie up your day with inappropriate urgencies. The most important step in your daily planning is numbering your B's. A's will always be addressed because they're A's. You will still want to number A's and work through them in priority in case there's a redirection of your day, but thanks to this practice, none of your A's will fall through the cracks. The difference between mediocre workers and highly effective workers is that highly effective workers get much more high priority work done sooner, regardless of its urgency. In other words, they get the 1, 2, 3s of their B list done first. Whether you have a knack for working on the right thing at the right time or you need to better plan the course of your activities, you will optimize your focus and save time with the simple act of numbering. The average to-do list has more than 30 hours of work on it, and it's a great source of stress and delay. By midweek, you'll be nowhere near half finished with it, and too often we'll be flipping back and forth between the pages of all these to-dos, not looking for the next highest priority, but the fast, fun, easiest to-do thing first, just to have the satisfaction of crossing an item off the list. Plan your priorities the night before. If you wait until the morning, interruptions and distractions are likely to occur, and before you know it, you will be halfway through your day. But at the end of the day, you will be more realistic and aware with the tasks fresh in your mind, knowing where the highest priorities should be. You also want to create a list of only enough to-dos for the next day. The rest can be listed somewhere else. There's a sense of ease and satisfaction to be gained from working on a list that is likely to be accomplished in one day. For instance, I was once interviewing a president of a large hotel chain, and after I asked him, "What was the most important advice that you had ever received?" he said, "It was to create a list of only 6 items a day, to prioritize it, and then work through it in priority every day. It changed my life, and it is why I'm in this position today." The way in which this president related his advice was similar to a classic old story about the first CEO to have earned $1 million a year. He brought in the highest profile consultant of the day for a long consulting project with the objective of increasing productivity for the entire company. Although the CEO expected a long engagement with a big fee attached, the consultant stopped the engagement after trying to work with the CEO for just 2 days. He said, "My work is done here. I have just one piece of advice for you. Are you ready?" CEO was infuriated. He felt he was being fired. But he had promised his board of directors a significant progress from this engagement, and now he was about to get his little piece of advice. So the consultant said, "Just write these 3 things down. First, make a list of just 6 of the most important things for you to do in the day. Second, number them in order of priority. Third, work through them in order of priority. And if a fire comes up, literally or figuratively in your plant, put it out, but come right back to where you left off." The CEO seethed and asked what the consultant expected to be paid for this little piece of advice. The consultant quipped back, "Nothing. Not until you've done it for 28 days. Then just send me a check for whatever you think it's worth." A short 28 days later, the CEO sent a check for more than $20,000, a considerable sum for the 1920s when this story occurred. Consider how you might roll out the practices of an echeloned quiet hour and the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s throughout your team. I've found that when we make this part of the strategic growth process or a turnaround effort, that it has a significant impact on follow-through and progress through quarterly milestones. Remember, the best laid plans are fruitless unless the work needed to accomplish them hits the calendar. Stretch days, weeks, or months, how they can increase productivity. Most sales producers have a paradigm set for how many selling calls they can make in a week, but it's often far from their potential. One way to shatter those misconceptions is for every sales producer to attempt one stretch day or week each quarter. It's a day or a week when they present to as many prospects as humanly possible. What will result is a host of innovations on how to improve productivity and increase sales. Determine the appropriate length of time. The benefit of an entire week is that if sales reps go that long at a much higher level of productivity, they are likely to see how much closer their regular weeks could come to this stretch level of productivity. For example, in one industry with a client we've worked with for many years, I knew that the more productive reps could see as many as 15 appointments per week with no problem. The perception, though, with most reps, was 8 to 10 appointments would be a pretty good week. The average for many was just 5 appointments. This doesn't sound like very many, but in this company's high-ticket industry where 7-figure incomes were possible and middle 6-figure sales reps' incomes were common, reps could get away with a much lower productivity and still survive with enough commissions. I would first challenge the reps at each location to consider what they thought to be the absolute maximum number of appointments that they could see in a stretch week. The reps answered 12 to 15. I then challenged them with the idea that if they had 2 or more weeks to prepare for the stretch week, and if they aimed to book 5 breakfasts, 5 lunches, 5 cocktail hours, that would be 15. And they would still have the hours of 9 a.m. to noon, 2 p.m. to 5 to schedule even more appointments. Couldn't you fit at least another 10 appointments in those slots? So after that, with the help of a creative competition and incentives and the offloading of some low priority work, it was common for many reps to see 20 to 25 appointments during their stretch week. These are not numbers we expected them to maintain, but in every case the stretch experience had been done, they could never go back to the same paradigm. More importantly, they would maintain an increased level of productivity throughout their career. In another instance, sales reps were only able to have one stretch day, and only one rep at a time could be attempting a stretch day because others were needed to cover potential service calls. The average productivity at this company was only 5 selling calls per week. Their selling calls could be very short, so this was abysmal. They had allowed many different areas to distract them from selling activity, so they instituted an intense innovation effort geared toward eliminating, delegating, improving, and dynamically changing things. They no longer had to fill out detailed call reports by hand. Rather, just after ending each appointment, they would call in the details to a voicemail system for an office manager to transcribe. They began using street mapping software in conjunction with their contact database to prevent crisscrossing their large territories and getting lost on unfamiliar roads, and this reduced windshield time. They offloaded certain service calls and phone calls that were unnecessarily being routed to them, and much more. As a result, during just one focus day, this team was able to achieve, on average, as many as 20 selling calls in a day that led up to some sort of follow-up sales-related activity and ultimately a bid. This shockingly high one-day potential transformed both their mindset and their systems so that they were able to measurably increase weekly productivity. As a result, that location went from the worst to the first in its region. It wasn't so much a focus on productivity as the innovation process that turned around that team. Here are some points to remember as you facilitate your own stretch process. Begin with a focus on the innovation process. Emphasize that it's not the people that are broken, but the process. Remind them of the urgency of your situation and the strategic growth objectives. Share with the team the current best practices and productivity levels of your most productive reps. Challenge your team regarding what they think is the maximum possible number of calls. Create competition, incentives, and a sense of fun around the process. Give plenty of time for participants to stack their stretch days or week. There's nothing wrong with taking 3 weeks to pack a week to the max. They will end up increasing productivity on both sides of a stretch week. Implement the innovations and pull in others to support sales in this process. Celebrate and analyze your successes so that you can scale them across the team. Consider making stretch days, weeks a regular practice, but be very careful not to conduct them too frequently. They can easily burn people out if improperly used. Get your team in front of more prospective customers. How important is it for your business to increase the amount of initial conversations and meetings with new prospective customers? For many businesses, it is one of the higher critical success factors. As such, it demands your creative attention and could be the key to your turnaround. One of the greatest frustrations for a sales producer is making the calls to set appointments. Here are a few tactics that can help your team make setting and seeing more appointments easier, faster, and more successful. If productivity truly is at a fraction of its potential in the sales team, and one of these tactics can work, then this action alone could make the difference in turning around a company. Setting up call campaigns as a follow-up to a particular mailing can help to ensure that the sales team will make the necessary number of calls to optimize their productivity. Working in tandem with marketing efforts, if you were to have a monthly process of a certain number of mailings going out per sales rep, and require follow-up within so many weeks of each mailing, you can create a marketing and sales rhythm, which can become a key to turning around sales forces that have gotten stuck in a rut of low-call activity. You will need to ensure that the targets are well chosen and the approaches used in the process are kept fresh by ingraining the innovation process throughout this effort. Consider having preset times every day for appointment setting or having reps set appointments together in teams. Some companies have instituted team competitions, and just the fact that a pair of reps commit to sitting down to the phones at the same time makes a significant impact on follow-through and results. This idea has even been applied at clients that have remote sales forces. The paired teams check in just before and just after the call times and share ideas and results. Consider using full or part-time appointment setters. You may even have on your staff right now the perfectly skilled people with the time to fill up the calendars of the sales team. Often you will find that detail-oriented, personable people whom you have managing the office or directing phone calls are more suited to diligently filling up the spaces of other people's calendars. These types of employees are often more strategic about how they might fill up the calendar and map out the travel of your sales team. In other environments, outsourcing appointment setting is an appropriate option and can be less costly than hiring or carving out the time from your current staff. You have to get past any complaints you might receive along the lines of setting appointments is the sales team's job. In fact, part of the definition of management is to leverage the strengths of the human resources on your team while minimizing the impact of their inherent weaknesses. Stop the stubborn fight of trying to get salespeople to do things they might not be as effective at doing, if that is the case on your team. Your sales team is probably effective at the actual selling if they can just get in front of more people. So it's time for you to look at this a bit more creatively. Innovate the appointment setting process. Whether you're gathering ideas from the marketing side or looking at how and with whom the appointments are being set, you can usually identify areas for innovation. I recommend that you and other innovative members of the team just sit, observe, and listen to the process of appointment setting, just as you should occasionally be doing on selling calls. And after I had helped a client refine its messaging, which ultimately led to innovations in the verbiage used in appointment setting efforts, I sat to observe the sales reps use their new individualized scripts. In addition to seeing the new scripts lead to significant improvement in appointment setting ratios, the process of sitting and observing led to another important insight and innovation. I noticed that there was a common habit in the reps' delivery. When they got to the critical question of asking for the appointment, they would go up in the tone of their voice, like a child who lacks confidence and is asking for permission from a parent. Upon further research, I found that the child tone is subconsciously read by the listener as a lack of confidence. You might notice the way newscasters' voices always seem to go down at the end of their sentences. They are coached heavily on inflection and the tone of their voice, as these factors greatly affect their credibility. At my client's location, we discovered that coaching the team on this one point raised appointment setting ratios even further. The lesson here is that for such an important process, it is critical to occasionally have a third party look closely at it and apply the innovation process for continuous improvements. Do you believe that your sales team is paid to sell? In other words, get and keep more customers, and that everything else is secondary? Many leaders tell me emphatically that this is what they believe, but their processes indicate a much different priority. Sales reps are required and then either punished or incentivized to file irrelevant paperwork or gather information that is a significant drain on their time and of no use to their main purpose. Often when you take everything off their plate except for the absolute essential activities related to their central purpose, great increases in productivity can occur. I recommend that you install an innovation process for optimizing the amount of time that sales reps spend in front of decision makers who can expand the business. If others can work on retention and sales can focus on expansion with a hunter and farmer approach, then you'll probably be able to open the funnel to a much wider throughput. Consider beginning a campaign in which a sales productivity czar looks at every piece of documentation, call reporting, note-taking, and communication that might be unnecessary and abolish the outdated and unneeded with a passion. The effort goes back to the classic questions: what do we need to stop doing, and what if we weren't doing it today, would we not institute as a practice if we were considering beginning it anew? Break the glass ceiling of commission caps. CEOs are often maligned for getting large incomes and bonuses in public companies, but I believe the bigger sin is for small and mid-sized companies to have any kind of limit on the earning potential of the sales producer. I can understand why larger companies who have a promote from within policy might need to cap out sales producers by splitting territories or other methods. They will only find internal candidates who are willing to make that next step and responsibility. If there's some increase in pay without the caps, there might not be the incentive to move up the ladder. That is a rare situation, though, and limited mostly to the Fortune 500 companies. Is there any sense of jealousy in you or throughout the company toward top echelon sales earners who might be earning far more than any of the executives? Jealousy of this sort is often the impetus behind instituting practices that nip healthy growth in the bud, such as the capping of commissions or realignments that have the objective of bringing top sales earners' incomes more in line. When you are on the ropes in a turnaround, the person who gets the credit or how much the best sales producers are earning must be the least of your concerns. I have seen far too many times when the unleashing of a few or even just one of the power-selling top echelon sales performers was the key to keeping a company afloat and directed toward sustained health. As a leader, you must address the bad attitudes that might be directed either way with the top sales performers. You must also work to eliminate any possible constraining factor that could be governing your top sales producers from looking for much greener pastures. Many significant strategic innovations for business and its direction have come when a salesperson has the financial reward as well as the permission for looking outside the typical business and market to exponentially larger markets. From million-dollar commissions to even billion-dollar commissions, the result has been an expansion in the economy, the company, jobs, and ultimately many families' lives, which were improved because leadership wasn't afraid to pay a sales rep handsomely for such significant innovation.